just wanted to kind of give this a trial run and let you know that I'm on the app. I'm a longtime correspondent who's been based in Jerusalem, and then I was based in Moscow for 12 years as a bureau chief there for NBC, and then I'm here in London where I live with my family, and I do a lot of freelance television work out of London. Let's see if I can get that lamp out of my head. There you go. It's a little bit better. And so what I'm going to be doing, hopefully, I think, is sort of coming to you weekly and just giving you an update on European news, which I think would be a cool thing to do. Let you know what's going on in England, in the United Kingdom, and then also in countries like France and Germany, and even in the Far East of Europe, where you get into Belarus, and then also Russia. So what's been going on there? And by the way, hi, Pablo from Los Angeles. Good to see you. And Peter, hi from Seattle. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to start our first broadcast with one of my guests who's a regular columnist here and is very insightful, just kind of what the news is, and we'll pick 4 or 5 topics and talk to you about it. But, just looking across my beat, which is Europe right now, I can tell you that, for instance, the controversy continues with Alexei Navalny, who was one of the main opposition leaders in Russia, who was poisoned late last week as he was on a flight from Siberia back to Moscow, and the clinic where he was finally evacuated to in Germany is saying that they feel that there's no doubt that he was indeed poisoned. And the controversy continues about who did it and why. And a lot of fingers pointing towards the Kremlin and President Vladimir Putin as the man that would have the motive and the means to order the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And the Kremlin has officially said that they didn't do it, and they have vehemently denied doing it. But it's very important right now in terms of what's going on politically in Russia, because right next door in Belarus, you have elections that just took place with Alexander Lukashenko, who's been a president there for 26 years, since the fall of communism. There were elections that, over the years have widely been deemed to be fraudulent and fake. But this one he was really called out on because a woman was running against him. She's a mother of 2 kids whose husband was jailed for running against Lukashenko and opposing Lukashenko. And I think people just took to the streets after the election, knowing full well that it absolutely was a fake election. And so now daily you have demonstrations taking place in Belarus. Lukashenko at first was very brutal in his crackdown. He arrested a lot of people, put them in prison. And then people took to the streets because some of their friends were tortured. And so those demonstrations against Lukashenko continue. The European Union has come out and said that the elections were fake. And therefore, they say that Lukashenko was not elected in free and fair elections. And those demonstrations continue. It's kind of the Belarus Spring. And people say that President Putin in Russia has been threatened by that. Alexei Navalny, who is running the opposition in Russia, was saying that the same thing could happen in Russia, and he was trying to get people to go to the street. And that's one of the reasons why Navalny may have been poisoned. And also, we just finished doing our podcast, which we do a series of podcasts called Backstory with Dana Lewis. And if you have a chance to take a look at those podcasts, take a listen to those podcasts, that would be great. We just did something on police brutality in the U.S., and qualified immunity. We just did a long piece on Navalny, poison in Russia. I talked to one of my long-term friends in Beirut, Lebanon, after that terrible explosion there, which tore through the port and ripped down hundreds of buildings in Beirut. And poor Lebanon has already got more than 1 million refugees from Syria. They have huge economic problems. They're overwhelmed with COVID-19 in Lebanon. and they're struggling now to try and rebuild. Hi, Mark from Los Angeles. They're struggling now to rebuild an entire city, and it's going to be very, very difficult. And the government resigned, and the entire country is wobbly. We just did on Backstory with Dana Lewis podcast. We just did a 2-part series on Belarus, Spring, and we talked to a former deputy foreign minister there, who was jailed in the last series of elections, and he was tortured. And he spoke to us about he spoke to us about the illegitimate elections and the brutal regime of Lukashenko, and some of the other things we've been working on are COVID-19 and how that's been playing out in countries like Spain and France. Where I just came from. I was on vacation in France. We drove. We didn't want to get on a plane. And I can tell you that in terms of, being able to compare that to the United Kingdom, France has been very strict. When you take a look at the wearing of masks in places like Marseille and Nice and Paris, mandatory mask wearing in offices. And then now, as my kids are about to go back to school in England, next week, there's been tremendous controversy here because people have been saying you don't need a mask. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, came out and said you don't need a mask. What's important is that kids need to, it is live indeed. I'm looking at some of the messages here. So where were we? We're talking about masks, and the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, coming out here and saying that you don't need masks to go back to school. What's important is that kids get back to a normal educational schedule and don't worry about the mask. Suddenly Scotland came out and said, no, you know, this is supposed to be the United Kingdom, but it is quite divided over the issue of COVID-19 and mask wearing. Scotland came out and said, no, kids have to wear masks in corridors and in crowded hallways and in places where they cannot maintain any kind of social distancing. Interesting then that Prime Minister Boris Johnson now has done an about face and said, okay, maybe in corridors where social distancing is not maintainable, then yes, you need to have masks for kids. Then the World Health Organization has come out and recommended that people over 11 years old, kids over 11 years old, 12 and up, should be wearing masks, period, given the spread of COVID-19. So now you're seeing some of the schools here in London say that they will encourage or allow kids to wear masks in corridors, but not in classrooms. I mean, I just wrote a letter to one of my kids' schools, and they said that, you know, it's really up to the parent. So, I mean, it's been very, very confusing in the United Kingdom, and not a very solid policy. And a lot of parents are concerned, and a lot of kids don't know what to do either. And there's been a lot of confusion that will be playing out in the next week or so. And I think that on one of the other television programs that I'm involved in, that is also here on HAPS, which is called Quick Hits. That's one of the things that we'll talk about later on today, and with all the news in the United States, but also how the wearing of masks is playing out. Somebody writing a note there from saying, you know, thanks to Nicola Sturgeon, who is the leader of the Scottish National Party. And the reason why somebody would write that is that, in fact, she has been very conservative in COVID-19. And Boris Johnson, incredibly, has not been. And the United Kingdom had one of the worst records after the United States and after Brazil of COVID-19 deaths. I mean, France has had about 30,000, Spain's about the same, 30,000 deaths or so. And here, the official figures are somewhere around 50,000, but it is probably upwards to 65,000 because they had just runaway COVID-19 deaths, and a lot of them in senior homes, where the government said early on in the pandemic that people should be pushed out of senior homes, and those beds should be made available as the pandemic spread through the spring and into the summer. And so the elderly were sent back to senior homes, where they then introduced COVID-19 to other elderly people, and there were a huge number of deaths. You do need a mask. Wash hands frequently. Good spacing. It can work. Thank you for your message. So anyway, there's so many things going on in Europe. So what we'll do is tomorrow we'll start talking kind of, and I hope to do it at least once a week, maybe a couple times a week. I'd like to talk to you about what's going on in Europe, and we'll run through some of the big headline stories, and I'll do that on HAPS at least once a week. And then look for me on Quick Hits with some of my great colleagues who have fantastic analysis. Quick Hits is about 15 minutes long. We run through a lot of news and a lot of commentary very, very quickly, and that's done daily. So if you get a chance, check out my podcast, Backstory with Dana Lewis. It's on all the platforms from Apple to Stitcher to wherever you listen to podcasts. And I will talk to you soon from Europe and try to keep you up to date on stories going on here. Thanks so much for listening.